Hi, I'm Clarissa Ward. Thank you so much for joining me for this very important panel on protecting children's futures, the ABCs of reaching and teaching children in crisis. Now, as many of us know, we're in the midst of an unprecedented crisis, and children may not be the face of that crisis, but they are most certainly the victims of this crisis. And often is the case that the most vulnerable of them are the ones who are struggling the most as the world tries to navigate this global pandemic. Now, back in 2018, the LEGO Foundation gave a landmark grant of $100 million to Sesame Workshop to essentially help educate children who are in challenging places, who are in places of crisis, and really focusing with an emphasis on the importance of education during play. This, of course, is a hugely vital way to try to engage children. And so today, I'm very lucky. We are here talking with Sarah Bouchie, who is the Vice President of Global Programs at the LEGO Foundation, and of course, Sherrie Westin, who is the President of Social Impact at Sesame Workshop. And what they're going to be talking about is their partnership, the work that they're doing together in order to reach children in crisis zones. I should add that the $100 million grant that was made specifically for children who are victims of the Syrian refugee crisis and the Rohingya refugee crisis. And today we're going to be digging in on the work that they're doing and also specifically how they are adapting to try to cope with the enormous challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic has thrown their way. So, Sherrie, let me start with you because Sesame Workshop has a long history of working with children, educating children in some exceptionally challenging circumstances. And as I just said, children haven't been the face of this crisis, but why is it so important that we keep children at the front of our minds as we sort of navigate a global response?
Well, you're so right. When you think of COVID-19, you don't think first of children. They haven't been the face of the crisis because they're not those who have been most impacted by the disease itself. However, if you think of the long-term repercussions, when you have over 1 billion children out of school around the world, obviously the impact on children is going to be the greatest. And I think the most important thing is that we are not only trying to reach children through every means possible, even when they're at home and not in school, but that we remember how important it is to reach children in those critical early years. Many countries around the world are prioritizing distance learning, but they're not all focused on the early years. I think only about 40%. And we know that reaching children in those first 5 years of life is when we can have the greatest impact, the greatest return on investment, because it's the time when their brains are developing the most. And if they're experiencing trauma, it can be absolutely devastating, debilitating, and with long-term repercussions. When you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, sadly, this is the first time in years that we're actually going down, that we're not seeing the same progress because of this pandemic. And it's also important to note that early childhood development helps to affect every single one of those goals. If we're investing in reaching children in the early years, we can show progress on each and every one of them.
Sarah, I know a lot of parents are struggling with this. Kids have been out of school for months now, and LEGO Foundation has really put such an emphasis on education through play and learning through play. Why is that particularly important for young children and families, and especially in this kind of moment of crisis that we find ourselves in now?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Clarissa. I feel like this is something it's a pretty common misconception that play and learning are separate aspects of childhood, but research shows us really that young children learn best through play. And in fact, playful experiences really help children develop a broad range of skills. Things like cognitive learning that we are all very familiar with, but also physical development, socio-emotional skills and the kind of creative things that we know are really important. And for children who are experiencing stress or trauma, in times of crisis, play can also be an outlet for kids that helps them to deal with their anxiety and bring about this socio-emotional resilience that we like to talk about. And that kind of a positioning is important for children, and I think parents and caregivers right now, because as you look at in times of crisis, there are three things we know that really make a difference for kids. Reduce stress, play does this. Make sure that there is a caring adult in their lives. Play can do that really effectively, and help them to develop these sort of life skills, the kinds of things like inhibitory control or problem solving that helps them unhold this uncertain space in a better way. And if there's anything that this pandemic has done, it's really cast a spotlight on the critical role of parenting, as well as the tremendous influence that parents have on a child's life and their home environment. So now more than ever, we think that learning through play is something where caregivers can help to contribute to a child's growth and development in a meaningful way.
And of course, obviously, parents are also looking and relying so much on the power of media. And Sherrie, I mean, Sesame Street pioneered education through television decades ago. How are you adapting and using media in this current crisis?
Well, you're right. I mean, it is very fitting that Sesame was created over 50 years ago, specifically to see if we could give children who didn't have access to quality early learning that opportunity through media. So I think the need for Sesame Street is greater now than ever, and it speaks to our entire sort of creation. But what we're doing now is we are using the platform of media to reach children all over the world. And as we mentioned earlier in our humanitarian work, that was a key component. It was not just the direct services, but it was creating opportunities to create new content that was local, that would inspire children and give them stories they could relate to, and reach them through not just television, but radio and digital and mobile. And so today we need to do that more than ever. There is an appreciation for the value, I think, more than ever, as countries are looking for opportunities to reach children in lockdown or when they don't have access. And we've also had to look at how we produce, quite frankly, because we couldn't even get into our production studios. So we've been fairly creative and innovative in how we have produced specials that look like we do today on this panel, where they're done virtually. You almost see a virtual play date with the Muppets. And picking up on what Sarah just said, we know how important the role of parents is, particularly right now when children don't have formal learning settings. We know how important that engagement and play between parent and child is. So a lot of what we've created have been specials that help model those opportunities, help enlighten parents on the importance, and give them opportunities to view these together. We know more families are at home with their children, so that this media can also be a catalyst for that engagement. I'd love to share one clip of a special we did called Elmo's World News, and this was really made possible by the LEGO Foundation as well. It's now in about 97 countries, believe it or not, in 39 languages, and we've modeled for children and caregivers, that importance of play and how we can create more learning moments through this media and through the opportunity to reach children in their homes.
As kids and families across the world navigate new realities because of the COVID-19 pandemic, a new Sesame Street special is bringing them a world of comfort, learning, and play. Created in partnership with the LEGO Foundation, Elmo's World News features Muppets and kids from around the globe who share ways they're continuing to play and learn, all while staying safe.
প্রতিদিনের রুটিন আমাদের সুস্থ থাকতে সাহায্য করে।
الرياضة كتير مفيدة. حركوا رجليكم.
Elmo's World News will air in over 15 languages across 5 continents, bringing together families from the Middle East to Mexico and Bangladesh to Brazil, giving them indoor activities, ways to foster playful learning at home, and strategies to manage big feelings.
think it's time to do the frustration dance.
At a time like this, when many children are out of school, it's more important than ever to keep the learning going. That's why we're developing new content to meet the evolving needs of families everywhere, helping them build the resilience that will carry them through these tough times and beyond.
I mean, you know, it's incredible to see that this is going out to 90 countries. But the scale of this just beggars belief. I mean, 79.5 million refugees, displaced people, according to the UN, 30 million of them children. And Sarah, I'm hoping to get your thoughts on, obviously the scale of this is enormous. And we know that children who are already vulnerable really do bear the brunt of this kind of a global crisis. But give me a sense of why you have made at the Lego Foundation refugee education such a priority. And tell me a bit more about the work that you're doing with Sesame Workshop.
Sure. Well, we're really very proud to be partnering with Sesame Workshop in this important space and see their leadership to bring a spotlight to the issues that young children who are in crisis contexts are facing right now. You know, the central promise of the 2030 agenda and the SDGs has been about leaving no one behind and reaching out to those who are furthest behind. And we really feel like children, especially those whose lives have really been upended by conflict and displacement, are in the greatest places of vulnerability. The Lego Foundation firmly believes that every child should be able to learn through play. And just because you're in a refugee situation, there is no difference there, and that we need to take a responsibility to help bring playful learning to a brighter future for young children. And that's why we're engaging with leading organizations, not just to do projects like we are doing with Sesame Workshop. The Play to Learn project is a partnership with Sesame Workshop and BRAC and the International Rescue Committee to really try to bring both direct services to children, reaching them in their homes, in centers, but also through mass media. We really together want to try to bring the humanitarian field where they're paying attention to these needs of young children, that their growth and development and early stimulation and early learning now is a specific and important moment when we can help them. And that's what this partnership really does.
And, you know, I know now we have an opportunity to look at another video. This one is from Cox's Bazar, from the refugee camps where, you know, hundreds of thousands, if not more than 1 million Rohingya Muslims find themselves at somewhere I've spent time. It is an incredibly difficult place for children to grow up. Let's take a look at this video.
Anna Sumaya Ehonar Badi Samarkul Kevot Yara Bedishim Atu Barma Mara Tuntu Muravari or Muravari Vajan Monotori Lapzola Gunzanavari. তারপর কন্যাপতি বাগুত তুলে খেলা এর শিখে দেয় যেহেতু আরা সুন্দর করে পারি তারা তো বেশি খুশি লাগে দেশ হল মানে কি দেশে শান্তি করে পারেন সাথে জান মানে কি শিক্ষাটা করি আর মাস্কর ওই তো সাবি আর গরি জিন মনে হয় মেথা যায়
So Sherrie, it's now been 2 years since this powerful partnership was cemented. And obviously, we are looking at just a drastically different
Right.
world to the one that we were living in 2 years ago. Give me a better sense of how you are coping, how you are adapting or improvising to meet the needs and challenges of the coronavirus pandemic.
Well, you're so right. But we have really tried to pivot and to respond to the pandemic. That unfortunately, the video you just saw that had those fabulous play labs, which BRAC runs, are not happening right now for obvious reasons. So as we've looked at the promises we've made and the commitments in the refugee settings, we know we can't have direct services. We can't have home visits. We can't have the play labs or learning centers, either in the MacArthur work, Alan or in Play to Learn. So we've had to innovate. And again, I think it speaks to the power. Fortunately, we know how to use media to teach. We pivoted to create content under the name Caring for Each Other, which is really being used throughout the world. And it's focused on both health and prevention, as well as the basic literacy, numeracy, and cognitive learning, and the social emotional needs that children and families have to help build resilience. And we've looked at more innovative ways to reach these children. If we can't do the home visit, we've created basic digital opportunities. In the Rohingya situation in Cox's Bazar, for instance, we're working with BRAC, training them, providing content so that they're doing basic phone calls to those same families they would have been doing a home visit, with the suggestions, with the prompts for the importance of learning through play. In the Syrian response region, we're using WhatsApp and able to reach those children and families with those tools, with those resources through WhatsApp, through digital, through YouTube, and of course through mass media. So it's forced us to look for other opportunities. It's forced us to be more innovative, both high tech and low tech. But the other important thing is we are shifting the research. It's so important that we measure the outcomes and impact. And so rather than being able to do a randomized control trial on a learning center or home visits, we're now testing what's the impact of these remote learning opportunities. How are children responding and parents and caregivers responding? How much is it promoting more play and enlightenment of parents, so that we can at least share that data, learn from it, and iterate as needed. And I have to say, I think that sadly, even when this pandemic is in the past, we will need to have proven means of reaching children and families remotely. We think this is going to be a value down the road. It's important that we strengthen the systems of remote learning, that we strengthen opportunities and access to digital, particularly for vulnerable communities. So our hope is that while this is not ideal, that we will still find effective means, and we'll learn from those means to be able to use them and deploy them, even in addition to our work when we can go back in person.
And I think it's always the case that even in the most horrendous of crises, there are opportunities that come out of it, and there are lessons that we learn that hopefully have positive impact down the line, certainly along what you're talking about reaching out through media. And but I guess in the spirit of the SDG Action Zone, I'd love to finish by getting each of your thoughts on what positive steps we need to be taking to rise to the challenge of this pandemic, to make sure that vulnerable children do not get left behind. And maybe Sherrie, you could offer some thoughts.
Well, I would reiterate something I mentioned earlier. Look, we are all going to be reprioritizing. The world understands the need for distance learning. It's our only way of reaching children when they don't have access to formal learning. But I hope that as we reprioritize, that we do not forget that it has to include early learning. And just as Sarah and I have been, sort of talking about the importance of investing in early learning for children in crisis settings for many years now, it's as important or more important than ever as we look at how do we reach these children in a situation like this.
Sarah, what do you want to chime in? Give us some of your thoughts on this, positive steps that we need to be taking.
Well, I think as Sherrie's comments bring about, we're at this transformational moment. There's this opportunity where everybody has to rethink everything. And in that moment, really redefining what do refugee children deserve around early childhood services, and how important is this idea of learning through play, where it's not one or the other and one happens without the other, but rather redefining play as an essential tenet of a proper early childhood development activity and program that children in the most vulnerable settings should really have access to.
Well, I think you've given us a lot to think about, and it's a really important topic. And it's a really important partnership, and it is, I think, really heartening as well to see the incredible work that you both are doing to try to ensure that these desperately vulnerable children do not get left behind and do not get forgotten. In all the coverage, we do forget that children are still very much the victim of this pandemic. So Sarah Bouchie, Sherrie Westin, thank you so much. Thank you all of us for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.